Indy 28 came over 2 days ago, and we spent over 24 hours straight time working on the car in the past 2 days. We got a lot done, but we've had a lot of setbacks that I created, and he got pissed pretty much. I set us back a good amount of time. I set us back hours. One of the setbacks was the oil pressure sensor. I broke the wire off of that and I had to recrimp and resolder that. Don't know how well you can see that. I soldered that and then put heat shrink on it, and heated that up. Now that's connected. And the next major screw up would be the radiator. I cracked the radiator right here at this retaining clip because I was trying to put this retaining clip on. It goes on this way, and I tried to hammer that on, and I end up breaking this entire assembly right here. Huge crack, and of course filled it up with water and it started leaking out of the crack. So we used JB Weld, a lot of JB Weld, patched it together, put some fibers in there from tarp, so it'd be like polyester fibers in there, mesh that in there, kind of like a fiberglass install, and gonna let that cure. And the busted radiator was one of the last steps. I mean, we were almost ready to fire this thing up before that happened. So that set us back another 2 or 3 hours. Plus the curing time is going to be 2.5 to 3 days, I'm thinking, before I can even fill that with coolant. So we were all ready to fill that with coolant. Start assembling the ignition system and then the intake, and basically just fired up. So that was a major setback. Show you the inside of my cooling system. And I called Jumba from the Mazda 626 forums about advice about all this rust in here. It's a ton of rust, and it's pervasive throughout the entire cooling system. Every single line in the cooling system, including the engine, is just chock full of this rust. And of course that is going to hamper the system's ability to cool. Now the V6 has an overflow. If it gets too hot, it just kind of overflows and seeps out. The i4 is just a reservoir, so it sucks excess coolant over into the cooling system if needed. So if it's burning off coolant, it will get it from over there. And instead in the V6, comparably in the V6, it would go from here to over there to dump excess. So it's kind of an opposite system. I believe that's how that works anyway. Like I said, I'm not a mechanic. Obviously, because I don't think a mechanic would do something as stupid as breaking the radiator. It's a brand new radiator, never installed, broken. Got the fuse box reinstalled, diagnostic system reinstalled, ignition coil, ignition module, battery tray bracket. I mean, there's a lot of brackets to go back and reinstall. The automatic harness is not the same as the manual harness, so a lot of brackets are going to be missing because just the harness is in a completely different shape, and that does matter as far as where you can route your wires. Here's the transaxle range sensor. You're going to want to leave that in park, and then that's drive, so that's as far over as you can go, so that's going to be parked. This notch over here, it won't even go over to that notch. We are going to attempt to use the automatic ignition system with the manual transmission, and I believe that's going to work somewhat, to some degree. It'll get it up and running, but in the long term, I'm going to want to do some more work and detail that. I just don't have the time or the money right now to get the stuff that I need. Mainly manual transmission harness would have definitely been a good thing to have. Get the harness, manual distributor. As you can see, this is the automatic distributor. The manual distributor has another plug right here, so that's an easy way to tell a manual distributor for an i4. The V6 distributor would plug in sideways right here this way. It also has 2 plugs. Got the EGR stuff installed, throttle cable installed, IAC lines rerouted, all the solenoids back there, intake manifold, fuel rail, PCV system. The master cylinder is leaking a little bit. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's leaking profusely down here. So I'm going to have to keep refilling the reservoir. You have your reservoir, which is the same as an automatic reservoir. However, this reservoir for the manual has an additional nipple that comes off the side here. The automatic reservoir does not have that nipple, and that nipple feeds the master cylinder. So you need that. You can get this off a junkyard car. This is my original I guess distributor block for the fluid distribution. That's from the automatic. You don't have to swap that. You don't need that. You just need the reservoir. Of course, you're going to need a master cylinder. And down here is going to be your slave cylinder. That's the one that has the plunger that actually goes in and out to move your shift fork. Or that's not actually called a shift fork, that's called your clutch fork. Shift fork is actually an internal component inside the transmission. I mean, people also call this the shift fork because that's what it's made for, is clutch, but it's actually clutch fork. And I have called that a shift fork many times in previous videos. It's just, you know, habit. I have a leak in my power steering line down here because in order to remove the rear engine mount, you have to remove that line. There's no way around it, and I described that in the previous video where I was removing said mount. And now that line is not resealed properly and is leaking. So I'm losing power steering fluid. Here is your power steering fluid. It's both on the same location in the manual and the automatic. And it requires automatic transmission fluid. The same exact stuff that you would put in your automatic transmission is your power steering fluid. Same exact fluid. And it's 1.25 liters. 1.25 liters dry. So you might only need to fill it up a little bit in order to top off the system. But if you have a big leak and it drains all the power steering fluid because of like a leak at one of your power steering lines by your rack, just to have that information out there, it's 1.25 liters to refill that entire power steering fluid system. The gearbox oil that only goes down here is 2.7 liters for gearbox oil. And that is 80W90 GL4 or GL5 gearbox oil for the manual i4. I don't know if it's the same for the V6, but you can look up those specs online if you need them. The engine oil is 10W30, 3.7 liters dry. And when I say dry, I mean bare bones, no engine oil fluid in the system whatsoever, including your oil filter, which is down over there. Now, if you do a swap of an oil filter at the very same time and you use a new oil filter, then that is considered a dry system. If you have no oil in your engine and a new filter, because the filter will hold about 0.2 liters of oil. So if you use your old oil filter and your system is bone dry, then you use 3.5 liters of engine oil. So that's the specs for those. Brake fluid, also clutch fluid. Brake fluid and clutch fluid are the same in the manual, and that is .3 fluid. And there is no specs for how much to use because you're going to go through like a bottle or something like that while you bleed the lines. And unfortunately I did not get a video of how Andy ND28 bled the lines, but he used a drinking straw in a bottle, and it was just the most simplistic setup ever, and he did it brilliantly, and I really wish I would have been able to videotape that for everyone. Unfortunately, I'm on another time crunch, and I don't have the luxury of videotaping everything as I went through it. But now it's kind of like the day after, the aftermath, and I've got a little bit of time to come back and shoot some video for everyone. And as Ike said, he's jonesing for another video, and unfortunately it's not going to be an instructional video, Ike. It's just going to be kind of some tips. And you will get some good stuff out of this. If you're interested in the ATX, the MTX swap, I've still got some good tidbits to come. Just hold your horses for a couple minutes and I'll get to that stuff. The coolant, which I have yet to put in the radiator, takes 7 liters when it's dry, when the system is bone dry. And you want to do a 50-50 mix. Alright, so you have 1 gallon of your concentrate, and then you have 1 gallon of distilled water, and that's going to make 2 gallons for the same exact price as you would pay for 1 gallon of the 50-50 premix. So you're gonna, if you want to buy the premix, yes, it's already premixed, all you have to do is pour it in your system, but you will be spending twice as much for the same exact amount. So that's something to consider if you're trying to save money. Alright, in order to install the clutch pedal, the first thing that you are going to want to do is remove your seat. There are 4 bolts, 1 on each leg, and just fold the seat up and over and remove the seat. And without the seat, as you saw in my junkyard trips, maybe you might want to go back and see the disassembly that it took me to remove the clutch pedal out of the junkyard car. I removed the seat, and the same exact process applies. And when you are in here, underneath of the seat, there is this long vertical hump here, and your back will be laid directly on the middle of that, and there's no way around it, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to take you about 2 hours to install your clutch pedal and brake pedal. You do not have to mess with the gas accelerator pedal. You're only going to be messing with the clutch and the brake pedal. This entire brake pedal assembly is exactly the same as the automatic transmission brake pedal. The only difference, obviously, is the length. The automatic transmission brake pedal is about that long. So what you could do is just get this pedal arm, and it's only attached by a pin, and a cotter pin, and just remove that arm, and then you can slap that arm right back in there. That's all you need. It's the same exact bracket. However, you're going to have to remove this entire brake pedal assembly anyway, because this clutch pedal must be installed first, and then the brake pedal bracket gets installed on top of the clutch pedal bracket. So as long as you have to remove that stuff at the junkyard, you might as well get the entire brake pedal bracket, if that'll make you feel better. And you can just install it as one assembly. Although you can break it down, and you can just do the brake pedal arm, instead, and make your life a little bit simpler. But either way, you're going to have to remove this brake pedal assembly to get this clutch pedal in. The clutch pedal and arm and assembly and the bracket and everything has to be installed first, and then you install your brake pedal. And then there's this little collar that goes around the column. I don't know if you can see that, but it attaches, you can kind of see the one nut there, attaches the clutch pedal bracket to the brake pedal bracket up there. And there's only 2 bolts. There's one there, and then there's one there. And that's all that's involved with that. It's just a securing bracket to secure the two together. So you got your clutch pedal, then your brake pedal, then your securing bracket. And during all of this, you will need to remove your knee panel right here and drop the column. There are 2 screws up here. Let's see if I can get a shot of that. That one screw there, and there's another just like it on the opposite side. And all you have to do is remove those 2 screws, and your entire steering wheel will fall to the ground. And if you are laying backwards here, this will fall onto your chest, and you'll have to work with it onto your chest if you're doing this as a one-man operation. I tried to figure out some way to zip tie it and secure it so it stays in the up position. There's really no sense in doing that, because you need this entire column to be manipulated. There's a universal joint that connects the steering rack to the steering column, and it's in there with splines, and you do not want to remove the steering column and take it off of those splines. Otherwise, you're going to have to mark on that side and this side where the 2 sides line up, and then you can remove the steering column if you want. I don't recommend doing that, just because it's going to throw off your alignment even more, and then you're definitely going to have a professional come in and realign this, and that's going to cost you. So in order to save cost, do not disconnect the pinion side, the rack side, from the column side. Leave that universal joint connected. And now you can manipulate it. It will act just like any other universal joint, so you can pivot it side to side, so you can get your brackets up in there and bolted down. There's 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4 for the clutch pedal. There's 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4 for the brake pedal, and then they each have a screw that goes straight up and bolts into the top of the dash just to hold it from that location as well. That's basically how you install the clutch pedals. And then on top of this pedal arm is your neutral safety switch, and on top of that is your brake switch. And those are real self-explanatory. I mean, I could take out the brake switch in 2 seconds. It's just like a light bulb. You just twist it and then pull it out. And if you want to install it, you push it in and twist it. And that's all there is to it. That's real simple stuff. But the neutral safety switch, on the other hand, has 2 bolts that come out for a bracket, and you have to slide that on, and then the plunger assembly will hit the back of this arm. It's a little plunger assembly that goes in and out, and then it'll hit the back. So every time you push that down, it hits your neutral safety switch. And that's all there is to that. I'm sorry I didn't get to record the whole thing, but it took me about 3 or 4 hours to install it. So plan on having your back over this hump with your steering wheel sitting on your chest, and that whole entire steering column probably weighs about 25 to 30 pounds. Imagine having 25 to 30 pounds sitting on your chest for a couple hours. My chest is really sore today. It hurts. It sucks, but hey, you know, that's what you got to do. You got to do it. So that's what's involved with the pedals. Now on to the clutch hydraulics, which I didn't do. Andy 28 actually did all the clutch hydraulics while I was working on the brake pedals and the clutch pedal. And it took him about half the time to hook all this stuff up because he's a manual owner. He knows exactly how this stuff goes together and what it should look like. And then we bled the clutch together. I sat inside the car and pumped the pedal while he undid the... Okay, under this cap is another little nut. And that's your bleeder screw, or your bleeder valve. So as you have a friend press on the clutch pedal all the way, it will bleed through this, and then you tighten. And then you let him depress or let go of the clutch so it's in the up position again, and then press it again, and then you open this and more will bleed out, and then you close it, and then you let off, and so on and so forth. And you can look up clutch bleeding procedures online. I'm not going to go through them because there's already a million videos on how to do that. And since this is my first time, I do not want to put any bad information out there. We got it done. That's all that I need to say about that. Andy got it done. I just pressed on the clutch pedal, and there's pressure in there. A little bit of extra time. I'll just go over the procedure for swapping out the gearbox oil and a manual transmission 626. Okay, down right in between the cross member is your drain plug. That's how you drain your gearbox oil. Up here is your fill plug. See if I can get a good angle. That's your fill plug, also known as your leveling plug. So you would fill in the transmission oil up to that point. When it starts leaking out, that's when you know it's at the correct level. But your car has to be perfectly level in order for that fluid leveling port to work. So you drain from there, fill from there, and like Eric the car guy said, always undo your leveling port plug first, because if that doesn't open, then there's no point in draining the system. So make sure that opens first, and then open your drain plug. Now, unlike automatic transmission fluid, the gearbox oil fluid will come with these nipple attachments, and you have to find a length of hose. I suggest while you are at the store, you get a length of like something like fuel hose or heater hose or something like that. And what you do is you're supposed to squeeze this bottle to get it to come out. And they only give you a little nipple, suggesting that you're supposed to put this nipple directly into the fluid filler port and then squeeze all the oil in there. And it's really thick oil. This stuff is 80W90. So it's seriously thick and hard to squeeze out of this kind of bottle. So what we did was we attached a long hose and then basically turned it upside down so that it gravity bled into there. And I'm not going to do that because it's going to drip out, but that's how you do that. You don't just try and squeeze it up in there. You get a hose and let it drain in there. And that worked out fantastic. Of course, you want to put your drain pan in there to catch any excess that might drip out. And that's how you change your manual transmission gearbox oil. One good thing to note is when you get your clutch pedal assembly installed, it's kind of like a light switch. It's either up or in the down position. In the way the spring works, it either wants to keep it fully up, or if you start pressing it, it'll snap back all the way to the firewall, I guess. That anyway, it'll snap back all the way to the firewall, and you will have to grab it and pull it back up. And that is completely normal. There's nothing wrong with the way that is assembled. That's supposed to happen. The clutch master cylinder, the pin that comes in and out, will then provide all the hydraulic force to actually force this back up. So once you start bleeding it, that's when you start getting, see, that that feedback. All that feedback is coming from the master cylinder. That's all hydraulic pressure. That's all that's doing that. That has nothing to do with the way the spring is installed. That's just your slave cylinder. So you're not going to get any feedback until you start bleeding the brakes. And that was a concern of mine because I wasn't sure if I had just reassembled the spring in there, because I took the arm off the bracket and you have to reinstall it into a spring. And it only goes one way into that spring, and yes, once you put it in there, it'll be fine. So I thought that was a really good thing to note for guys that are doing this for the first time. This will only happen after you start bleeding and getting that pressure back. And Andy did a great job. If you can find a friend that has a manual that you're swapping to, either V6 or i4, so that they can tell you the correct feel, because they drive on it, they've been driving on it for years, they know exactly what that clutch pedal should feel like, and they just replicate their own, and that thing is really good. And that's all there is to that. Now you can keep your automatic brake pedal if you want, and I've heard of guys just cutting it off, and you'll want to get the exact dimensions. Just ask someone for the exact dimensions of that, and so you can like Dremel cut it off or something, and you can get the rubber brake pads, clutch pads, brake pads. You can get all that stuff for about $3 or $4 per pad from Rock Auto. They're freely available. You can find those no problem, and worst comes to worst, you can just pull them off a junkyard car. And for those of you who want to know what happened to the shift cable that was here, that long shift cable that goes through the firewall, well, we cut it. We ended up cutting it. It comes through something like that. As you can see, this is braided, and each one of these braided wires is just ridiculous strength wire. I've never seen a cable like this, and Andy commented on this as well. If this cable breaks for whatever reason, you're doing something really, really wrong. This is one of the strongest cables that I've ever seen in my entire life for this size. This size cable has the strength of a cable 2 or 3 times this size, because it was braided and multi-braided at that. And then it has a thick steel interior core wire, that one right there. This thing is not breaking. It took us a hacksaw and half an hour to get through this thing. And then once we got through it, we just pulled it out the other side, pulled out the middle cable. You have to pull out the middle cable first through the outside, and then hacksaw the rest of the way through, and then you can pull the rest of the thick sheath cable all the way through. We got rid of that one. Still have the starter interlock switch, and I mean, compared to how it was down there, now it's looking much cleaner. It's very clean up there. Back to OEM. I don't have all the accessory wires and all that. I took all my accessory wires off, junked them, scrapped them, they're gone. I'm not dealing with accessories for a little while until I can get this up and running normally, and that's a good policy to have. Okay, so after the cooling system debacle, we decided to go at the ignition system. So we're keeping the ignition coil module and the ignition coil, and as long as you have the distributor and the MAF and the IAT and the O2, which is down there, which Andy had to modify, as long as you keep the automatic ignition system intact, including the ECU, you should be able to run it. That way, as long as your transaxle range sensor is set in park permanently, you should be able to up and go in a manual transmission. That's the theory anyway. We'll see how it works once everything's running. I want to show you what Andy did with this O2 sensor. This manual transmission front mount bracket was just in the way because I detailed in a previous topic how bent my headers are. They're supposed to be straight down about right here, but you can see how the flange is off center. It's way over here, right? And that makes the O2 sensor also go way over here. And because the manual transmission bracket is different than the automatic transmission bracket, it wanted to rest right up against the edge of the wire. We couldn't even install the O2 sensor. So Andy took a big hammer and started wailing on that thing to make enough clearance room, and he put these zip ties to make sure that it's not going to cut through the cable just from vibration. And that was a fix. that took a little bit of work. We had to actually remove the header, and because it's on a U-joint, a flex pipe down there, you could actually flex this out and manipulate it a little bit so that we could get a hammer in there and hammer on that. And man, it was just, Andy was fixing one thing after another. The guy was just on it. Whatever needed fixing, whatever needed doing, he was on it, and he just nailed it. But because of my mistake, a huge mistake, and I feel horrible about it, it set us back so much time that he didn't have the time to stay here. So I'm going to let that dry for a couple days, and then fill it up with coolant and distilled water, get the ignition system hooked up. I mean, now we're almost basically back to stock. I just need to hook up the intake system, and I have a stock MAF, and I have a stock airbox. I just need to find a way to shore that up and secure it, and I'll be back all stock. I gave Andy all my intake components, and he said he was going to leave them here, but he forgot. I mean, it was like 3 a.m. and we weren't thinking right, so he took off with the intake components still in his car. And it's not like I need that. I can still run it with all that crap disconnected anyway. So that's where we are at. After the clutch pedal, brake pedal, clutch lines, intake manifold reinstalled, all that. And I'm sorry that I did not get enough time to shoot some video during the procedures and the fun. It was a lot of fun. We had an awesome time. And we were working like machines, or at least Andy was. I was kind of working like a slacking monkey in a zoo. Pretty neat stuff, and that's all I got for you today. So stay tuned for more.